Well, welcome, folks, to this edition of the 700 Club. That so-called drone the Iranians shot down wasn't one of those little silly things that flies around taking pictures. It was a $100 million piece of equipment, and the Iranians rejoiced. There's no question they did it. They've acknowledged it. And how do we respond? Well, I think the president was brilliant. He said, I'm not going to go after them, but that he did. And how did he do it? With cyber. We have the most sophisticated cyber war in NSA, and we cut them loose against the Iranians, against their command and control facilities, and that's just the warm-up. And if they want to continue shouting death to America, we have the capacity to put them in the dark. We could literally shut down their power grid. It would be a horrible thing, but we can do it. And meanwhile, in addition to that, the U.S. is set to impose a new round of sanctions on the Islamic regime. And Secretary of State Mike Pompeo is in the Middle East building support. Amber Strong reports.
Secretary of State Mike Pompeo is on the ground in Saudi Arabia and is scheduled to make more stops across the Middle East, garnering support for the administration's Iran policy. This as President Trump says he can still be a friend to Iran and is willing to meet no preconditions.
You can't have nuclear weapons. And if you want to talk about it, good. Otherwise, you can live in a shattered economy.
The president explaining to NBC News his last-minute decision not to launch retaliatory airstrikes after learning 150 Iranians would be killed.
I thought about it for a second, and I said, you know what? They shot down an unmanned drone, plane, whatever you want to call it, and here we are sitting with 150 dead people.
Meanwhile, Secretary of State Mike Pompeo says that maximum pressure campaign will continue. Pompeo urging the Iranians to negotiate.
I am confident that at the very moment they're ready to truly engage with us, we'll be able to begin these conversations.
But in Iran, lawmakers chanting death to America, and Iran's Navy chief warning they would be willing to shoot down more U.S. drones if necessary. National Security Advisor John Bolton says the U.S.'s restraint shouldn't be confused with weakness.
As President Trump said on Friday, our military is rebuilt, new, and ready to go.
Lawmakers on both sides of the aisle are praising that restraint.
The president, I think, doesn't want us to go to war. He understands that we've spent trillions of dollars on these wars and that we need to have more restraint and focus on home.
But as Congressman Ro Khanna tells CBN News, a bipartisan group of lawmakers are working to make sure any retaliation against Iran comes through Congress first. Now, according to reports, the U.S. did strike back, launching a cyber attack against Iran's military computers, disabling their rocket launch capabilities. Amber Strong, CBN News, Washington.
I want to commend the president. It was a brilliant stroke. Everybody thinks he's a reckless cowboy and with his finger on the nuclear trigger, and he is not to be trusted. By exercising this restraint, it was brilliant going into the election. He's taken away from the Democrats one of their big talking points, and it was smart politics. I don't think he did it for political reasons, but it has come out well in the end. Well, in other news, powerful storms slammed the heartland this weekend, bringing everything from tornadoes to lightning to flash floods. Ephraim Graham has that.
Pat, 5 tornadoes reportedly hit in 4 states, with one ripping through the Panhandle in Texas. The storms were blamed for at least 2 deaths. A flash flood emergency was declared in southern Missouri. In Kansas, fans at a country music festival ran for cover as lightning struck. And strong winds hit Illinois, knocking down the football bleachers at a high school. President Donald Trump is delaying his order to begin deporting mass numbers of people living in the United States illegally, giving Democrats in the House 2 weeks to overhaul the nation's asylum laws and provide $4.5 billion in funding to deal with the record number of families and unaccompanied minors crossing the border. The president tweeting Sunday, "I want to give the Democrats every last chance to quickly negotiate simple changes to asylum and loopholes." He announced the deportations last week, but put them on hold after a phone call from House Speaker Nancy Pelosi. Dozens of faith leaders gathered in Washington, D.C. to meet with security officials. Their mission? To learn how to protect houses of worship from domestic terror attacks. CBN News national security correspondent Eric Phillips was one of just a few members there allowed inside that meeting, media members allowed inside.
Well, whether you celebrate Christmas, Hanukkah, or Ramadan, it doesn't make a difference when it comes to violence that has been experienced by all religions. And we're not talking about actions that happened abroad. These attacks have happened right here on American soil. August 2012, a man killed 6 others and himself at the Sikh temple in Oak Creek, Wisconsin. June 2015, members at Emmanuel AME Church in Charleston, South Carolina were having midweek Bible study when a stranger showed up. They welcomed him and he participated until he took aim at the faithful, murdering 9 Christians. November 2017, an attacker unleashed a hail of gunfire at the First Baptist Church in Sutherland Springs, Texas. 26 people were assassinated, including an unborn child. October of 2018, a gunman stormed the Tree of Life Synagogue in Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania. During morning Shabbat, 11 killed, 7 injured.
Churches are soft targets. African-American churches have always been seemingly more trusting of people who come and go, more embracing of strangers.
We want to have a welcoming church where, people are really welcomed in, but then on the same token, we must have a secure place to worship.
People are afraid.
John Cohen is a professor at the Rutgers School of Criminal Justice and a Homeland Security expert. He helped organize the meeting.
The fact that we had senior officials from the FBI, senior officials from the Department of Homeland Security, senior law enforcement officials from cities across the country, and faith leaders together in one room talking about this problem.
The group discussed security measures houses of worship can put in place.
Many of us cannot afford security guards and officers and so forth. And so now how we began to utilize members of the congregation.
Another main focus was making sure information from faith communities flows to law enforcement and vice versa when an emergency situation happens.
In the realm of emergency response, they call it incident management system. It's kind of like what Nehemiah did. He gave everybody a role.
One familiar message that came out of the meeting: if you see something suspicious, say something. Law enforcement officials say bystanders are still the biggest key to stopping the bad guys before they strike. In Washington, Eric Phillips, CBN News.
Good advice and good to see churches preparing. Pat?
This probably goes against the grain for some, but I know that these thugs only attack what are soft targets. If they think there's somebody in that congregation that will shoot back, they'll be hesitant to start opening fire. And I do believe that if there were a couple of members of every church who were trained carefully in police procedure, in the use of firearms, and who knew how to handle things and didn't go off crazy, I think it would be a good thing if these people knew that if they go into the First Baptist Church of Sandy Springs or whatever, that they'll find somebody who'll shoot back. And if they did, they would be reluctant to start opening fire. And I think that's an important thing that might be considered. We have here at CBN, we have a trained police force. They're trained in the city. They're trained in weapons. They're trained in crowd control. They're trained in all these things. And so if anybody wants to come after us, they'll know that there's somebody here who can come after them. And I think that's important. Ephraim?
Pat, the Walenda family is flying high again. Last night, 2 of them walking 25 stories above Times Square. Brother and sister Nick and Leanna making a 1,300-foot journey between buildings and trading places in the middle. Now, for Leanna, it was a breathtaking act of courage. Her first time up since a devastating fall in 2017 broke nearly every bone in her face. Both she and her brother are believers, and all the way she sang hymns and praises to the Lord. The 2 are wearing harnesses, but they had no net. I believe this is a family for 7 generations doing this, Pat.
That was a scary thing. They are amazing. And that Rihanna, the fact that they could, on that high wire, could change places. She sat, he walked over top of them on that little teeny wire. Amazing. And they are praising God. They are deep believers. They had Joel Osteen praying for them before the thing. It was a couple of hours of real tension. Did you see them?
I saw the commercial for it, and I said, there's no way I'm watching that. I would be too nervous watching that.
My wife said the same thing, that I can't watch it.
But I'm so glad to hear that everything went well.
Well, but they did have a harness. I mean, if they dropped in the middle of Times Square, it would have been so horrible, but they balanced all the way across. It was an amazing display of whatever the skill you have of that wire walking. It's remarkable.
A remarkable
but
talent.
The sister had actually, they fell, that awful collapse, and broke every bone in her face, and here she'd come back, and it was flawless. Beautiful lady. I mean, praise God, it was a marvelous display.